Welcome back to Yahoo Finance Live. As we brought to you earlier, President Biden addressing some of the changes that is being pushed through in that $1.9 trillion proposal here in that relief package, largely upping and streamlining some of the ways that small businesses can access some of that stimulus money as Republicans continue to push back on maybe the size being too large and potentially damaging to future generations of Americans. And for more on that, I want to break down some of that Republican take here with our next guest. Congressman Tom McClintock from California joins us now alongside Yahoo Finance's Jessica Smith. Congressman, appreciate you taking the time to chat here. We've heard President Biden push back on some of those criticisms, mainly highlighting, look, if something's in there that you want to take out, you point to it and you tell me. So what's your take on 1.9 trillion and maybe the size to you in your eyes?
Well, first you have to understand what $1.9 trillion means. There are about 129 million households. You divide that into $1 trillion, it's nearly $8,000 a household. So we're talking about roughly $15,000 that being borrowed out of the future that an average household will have to repay through its future taxes, tax-driven price increases as businesses pass along their tax burden to consumers, lower wages, and inflation. Those are the only ways that a government debt can be paid. But we also have to understand there's only one way to provide relief to the American people. That's to end the lockdowns. Study after study is telling us that they've made no difference in slowing the spread of the disease, but they've caused as many as 192,000 additional deaths through suicides, domestic homicides, drug and alcohol abuse, delayed health treatments, delayed health screenings, and increased poverty. And they've decimated what a year ago was the greatest economic expansion in our lifetimes, which was showing the strongest wage growth in 40 years and actually narrowing the income gap between the rich and the poor.
So, Congressman, what part of the 1.9 trillion specifically then, what part would you take out? What part would you remove?
I'd take out all of the support for state governments that have bankrupted themselves with their lockdown policies. They made that bed. They need to lie in it. That should not be the responsibility of the taxpayers in states that were well managed. And the rest of the money ought to be targeted at those who've actually been hurt by the lockdowns. These bills make no distinction between the small shopkeeper who's been bankrupted by these policies and the government bureaucrat who's enjoyed a steady paycheck while staying at home.
Congressman, you talk about states that you say should not be receiving the federal help. Do you acknowledge that there are states out there that are in need of it? I mean, we've been hearing the budgets being depleted significantly as a result of the closures. As important as it is to reopen the economy, isn't there a buffer that's needed here for individual states in order to get the economy going again?
Where do you think all of this money is coming from? It's coming from the same taxpayers, whether they're paying taxes to the state or the federal government. The states are the ones that imposed these disastrous lockdown policies that have destroyed their economies and done irreparable harm to their constituents. They need to own up to that.
Just to jump in here, are you saying that states blanket should not get assistance from the federal government at all, or are there individual states that you're looking at that you think should get the aid?
No, that's exactly what I'm saying. The taxpayers in Florida, for example, in Texas and South Dakota, whose governors kept their states open, who kept their economies going, shouldn't have to pay for the utter folly of states like mine, like New York, like Michigan, all of the lockdown states run by Democrats who've destroyed their economies and done enormous harm to their constituents.
So you're saying that states like South Dakota should not be paying your state to help with that, because obviously California had quite a bit of a problem when it came to suffering a large amount of deaths and really having to battle a big outbreak there. So you would advocate for not.
Yeah, it's done enormous damage to the economy. Don't forget, California's income tax is so disproportionate. If the rich are doing well, and the rich have done very well from these lockdowns, it's the small shopkeepers who've been destroyed by it. It's the middle class who's been destroyed by it. The rich have done very well. And so California's revenues right now are actually running ahead of expectations. But the mismanagement of the state, particularly the enormous debt being run up by its pension systems. That's where this money will be going, by the way. It will be going to support the outrageous pension systems of states like California.
How are you looking at the issue of school reopenings right now? This is, of course, some of the money that's been allocated in that $1.9 trillion. There's a lot of debate about how, in fact, the schools should reopen, how much resources should be made available. I'm curious where you fall on that debate and how much you think is needed from the federal government in order for a successful reopening of schools across the board.
The schools should never have been closed in the first place, and that's what the science is telling us. The CDC's best estimate for COVID recoveries for those under 20 years of age is 99.9997%. For those under age 20, the flu is a bigger mortality risk than COVID. The science has been telling us this for nearly a year now. The last thing we should have done was to close the schools and destroy an entire year out of our children's education as well as their childhoods.
I did want to ask about the minimum wage. Obviously, that is a proposal that is causing a lot of debate here. It's going to be a tough sell. Is there any scenario where you would support a minimum wage increase, maybe if it's not $15, something lower than that?
Well, if all it takes to lift people out of poverty is to raise the minimum wage, why would you stop at $15 an hour? Why not $25 an hour or $100 an hour? The sad truth of the matter is, every time you raise the minimum wage, anyone whose labor is worth less than that minimum wage is now completely shut out of the job market. That's why the Congressional Budget Office, which is hardly a partisan think tank, they are a respected nonpartisan institution within the Congress, is estimating that the increase will cost about 1.4 million jobs. And that, by the way, is at a time when this administration is waging war against energy jobs and talking about flooding the labor market with millions of illegal immigrants.
Congressman, I'm kind of confused by pairing a couple of these points you're making. When we talk about the rich doing better, you sound aggravated that they're doing better while those who need stimulus might not be doing as well. You think about what a stimulus check could do that, specifically for those making less than $75,000. And then on the school opening front, this package has $130 billion to reopening specifically K through 12 schools and $160 billion to testing and vaccines, which seem to do that in a healthy way. So I'm curious how you pair those and say this isn't a smart thing to push through now.
Well, first of all, you don't need money to reopen the schools. The schools are already financed. The problem is they're not educating our children. They need to reopen immediately. And with respect to those making under $75,000, some people making under $75,000 haven't been hurt at all. They've been getting a steady paycheck. Again, a good example would be a government bureaucrat sitting at home getting a steady paycheck. Meanwhile, the server at a restaurant has been absolutely decimated by this. It makes no distinction between those that have been hurt and those that have not been hurt. I'll be honest with you, I think $1,600 is far too little to compensate a shopkeeper who's seen their entire life's work destroyed and been bankrupted by these policies. And it's much in excess for a government bureaucrat who's been getting a steady paycheck while staying at home all these months.
Although the $1,600 is not necessarily for businesses, but individuals. A lot more to speak to, Congressman, but it's good to talk to you today. Representative Tom McClintock joining us from the state of California.